Episode 2, The Trouble with Higgs. Cycle 99 is a swashbuckling adventure story about extinction, magic, and hope, where you design the characters. Chapters release every Tuesday. Visit patreon.com/pitchpine productions for free to vote on chapter and character polls. This story is family-friendly, but may contain occasional strong language and mild violence. Welcome aboard the airship Bannockburn. Your lenses come into calibration, bronze fixtures circling the great incandescent bulb of the lighthouse and then settling with a series of 4 heavy thunks into alignment. The polished crystals scatter scant filaments of light in their swinging motions, sending patterns of rose, emerald, purple, and gold crisscrossing the ornate wooden flooring. Then, the life of Horace Worthsome, Jr. comes into focus. "Higgs!" Lottie shouted down the hallway. "Higgs, what on earth are you doing?" Horace Worthsome, Jr. did not reply, except for a muted little whine that barely made it past the goose-down duvet covering his head. There was no reply for Higgs to give, both because he did not know the answer to his older sister's question, and because replying was a significant portion of what his family called the trouble with Higgs. When he was a child, Higgs' first, barely intelligible word was lightning, because that is what he felt in his brain and his bones every day of his life. The word had taken great effort to form, and Higgs had decided then and there that speaking was basically not worth it. The trouble had started in Higgs' infancy, and had taken several physical forms over the years, but in every stage of life, the central problem was that Horace Worthsome, Jr. was not Horace Worthsome, Sr. This was currently very apparent, because Horace Worthsome Sr. wouldn't have spent the better part of the last week in bed. Higgs, on the other hand, had only left his cushy warren to do the necessary actions that kept him alive, to go to the toilet, to eat, to allow his team of medical specialists to see him, and to be berated by his father. Why had Higgs retreated to the safety and comfort of his bed? It wasn't because of the lightning. Higgs could handle the lightning. It was because Higgs had just turned 21, and on his 21st birthday, his father had ordered, Higgs to complete the Worthsome rite of passage, the first step towards inheriting the family's vast business empire. Only Higgs couldn't do it. More than that, he hadn't been able to do much else since. At a loss, Horace Worthsome Sr. had evidently called in sister-shaped reinforcements. Horace Jr.'s door slammed open, adding new detail to the permanent door-handle dent in the wall, a souvenir of Lottie's customary bombastic entrances and lack of consideration for the Worthsomes' expensive penthouse. "Get up, Higgs! You're meant to be at the docks today!" Lottie flounced in, and her prim seersucker sundress and golden-brown curls flounced too. Higgs gave another indistinct grumble of displeasure, and one pale foot emerged from the lower corner of the duvet. Scanning the off-kilter posters Higgs had never bothered to straighten, the out-of-battery laptop, the sagging shelf of Marvel comic books, and the laundry all over the floor, Lottie finally spotted Higgs' AAC tablet, lying forlornly beneath a set of dirty underwear. You see, Horace Worthsome Sr. had taken great pains to acquire a son. Lottie's conception and birth had had complications enough, resulting in a brief stint in the NICU. But Horace Worthsome Sr. had not been satisfied with Lottie. He loved her, of course, and sought to make every decision he could to ensure that her life would be successful and comfortable. But she was a girl. So despite the advice of their medical team and the advice of their second opinion medical team, Mr. and Mrs. Worthsome had conceived another child. And that child should have died several times over. Higgs scraped by through a much longer stint in the NICU, but grew sickly and weak the moment he was brought home. Still, Horace Worthsome Sr. wanted a male heir to take over the family business, and wasn't about to let this one go to waste. So, with all of the force of the Worthsome name and bank account, Horace Sr. set about keeping Horace Jr. alive at any cost. He cared not whether Higgs spoke via sign language, AAC tablet, or his own tongue, only that he would someday be able to order his employees around with confidence. He cared not whether his son required surgeries or mobility aids, so long as he would someday wear a crisp, expensive suit and command a business meeting. Horace Worthsome Sr. cared not who Horace Worthsome Jr. was at all, in fact, so long as he was precisely his father's son in every way. Using the tip of her baby blue ballet flats, Lottie made a sound of disgust as she freed the tablet from the clutches of the dirty briefs. She scooped it up, wiped the fingerprint smudges away with the edge of her dress, and then pushed it towards Higgs, shoving it beneath the duvet as though his thoughts would automatically be translated via its software without the cooperation of his fingers. That was the other trouble. Whatever neurological mishap had gobbled up Higgs' speech also raced through the rest of his body from time to time, sending spasms through his nerves that were anywhere from frustrating to painful. On his worst days, even written words escaped his lightning-addled brain. This was no problem for Horace Worthsome Sr., who immediately supplied a large text tablet with both a full keyboard, allowing Higgs's words to be translated via text-to-speech for when his fingers cooperated, and a simpler photo-based system of message buttons for when words became unrecognizable and his fingers flinched and trembled. Higgs was certain that if his father could have arranged for his thoughts to be directly communicated to, or better yet, controlled by, Horace Worthsome Sr., no tech startup would have been left unfunded until it was achieved. Though the last time Higgs had voiced this thought to Lottie, she'd easily replied, "Well, if he ever tried, I'd stab his foot with a fork at our next dinner party." In reality, Horace Worthsome Sr. and Jr. were both satisfied with a combination of the sleek, navy blue, bulletproof AAC tablet and American Sign Language. Higgs shoved the tablet aside and rolled over. He lazily signed, "Go away," to Lottie. "Come along," Lottie cajoled. Higgs, you're literally living my dream. Do you know what I'd give to be boarding that airship instead of attending Wimbledon with some European prince?" Higgs couldn't help it. From where his face was smushed into his pillow, he smiled in amusement. He rolled back over, prodded his tablet to life, and tapped out a response. "Belgium or Spain?" "Oh, I don't even know." Lottie sighed and flopped down on the bed. "Take a shower, you louse. You stink." Lottie was still there when Higgs dragged himself out of the shower. Bathing was, in general, an ordeal. The painful lightning would shoot down his legs, sending his knees buckling. So, despite the supposed urgency of his departure, and to signal his deep protest of the situation, Higgs took his time, sitting placidly on the plastic stool beneath the scaldingly hot water. Now freshly washed and limping, Higgs settled back down onto the bed next to his sister. She was examining her nails, manicured in a blue that matched her seersucker as well as her shoes. "I don't want to go," Higgs signed. "I'll miss you." "Worthsomes don't miss each other," Lottie scolded. She'd taken to the cold Worthsome pragmatism much more readily than her little brother. But she let her hand fall to the bed, and her fingers, unacknowledged by either sibling, crept along until they had wrapped lightly around Higgs's. "Get your exoskeleton on. I'll drive you to the dock." "That car will kill us," Higgs quipped. Lottie's ability to pilot an aircraft was famously better than her landside driving. "Well, then you'll be saved from your thrilling adventure," Lottie replied, unconcerned. "And I'll be saved from another hot day making small talk and watching two men hit a ball back and forth." Higgs let out a laugh and set about getting himself fit to operate in public. The real trouble with Higgs was that nobody could quite figure out what was wrong with him. Through no known chronic illness, physical nor emotional trauma, there was the lightning. So while Lottie watched and idly tapped at her smartphone, Higgs assembled all of the accoutrements he would require for his upcoming voyage. He gathered his tablet, his talkie as Lottie called it, including its charger, external battery pack, and small portable solar cell. Then he set about fitting the braces over his knees and lower back. The right elbow brace, a newer addition, went around his forearm and bicep, and a spare walking stick, his walkie, as Lottie called it, was tucked into a special pocket in his satchel alongside a bottle of painkillers. His glasses, for what the doctors could only diagnose as an astigmatism, were placed gently on the bridge of his nose with trembling fingers. These, of course, were all discounting the various metal plates, screws, bolts, braces, and other assorted implants peppered throughout Higgs's body to allow him to remain more or less upright at any given time. And that, in fact, was the real trouble with Higgs, and it was not about Higgs at all. The trouble with Higgs was that his father had spent the better part of 2 decades replacing every part of him that Horace Worthsome Sr. had deemed a potential liability, the same way he fired employees who did not meet his standards, all to ensure that he had a son fit to take over the family business. Never mind what Higgs wanted. Joining the family business, it turned out, had so shaken Higgs, all words had fled, and no matter how much Lottie coaxed, he could not speak about it. Now, he was being sent out aboard the Bannockburn against his will, all in the hopes that he would return from this voyage not as Higgs, but as Horace Worthsome. In other words, Higgs had been so thoroughly rebuilt in the image of his father's son, he no longer quite knew who he was. And neither do you. Lottie's sunny yellow convertible swung around the corners at a breakneck speed, and Higgs would know, his neck being one of those areas the lightning tended to congregate. Since his last surgery, however, he'd experienced less risk of neck breaking. Until now. "Slow down," Higgs signed. But when Lottie took her eyes off the road to look at him and nearly swerved into a lamppost, he tapped the message out on his tablet instead. Still, Lottie just cackled, the wind whipping through her hair, the dark tendrils curling around the headrest like octopus tentacles. The car shot out of the city streets and onto the highway, and the sparkling blue Pacific Ocean opened up before them. Down the hill, Higgs could already make out the Bannockburn, looking more like the toy aircraft he and Lottie had played with as children than the behemoth Zeppelin that would be his home for the foreseeable future. The Worthsomes had been longtime investors in exploration. Atlantis, Oz, Narnia, Utopia, whatever you wanted to call the mythical lost land, Horace Worthsome Sr. wanted to be the one to find it. Or at least to buy his way into having his name attached to whoever did. He also wanted his children to live lives of prestige and luxury, which meant marrying Lottie off to the most whimsical of remaining royalty and pushing Higgs out of the nest, insisting that he was ready to fly. Literally. As the convertible swept around a hairpin turn, Higgs began to make out the people swarming the Bannockburn. If he had to guess, he'd imagine the crowd to be a mixture of avid enthusiasts, confused tourists, vulture-like press, and the crew themselves, whoever they were. Higgs hadn't bothered to wonder who it was that would be joining him on this voyage. He was too busy feeling sick to his stomach, and not just because of Lottie's driving. Lottie careened through the crowds, honking the horn of the yellow convertible until passers-by scattered out of their way. She pulled up to a uniformed gentleman manning a gate and lowered her sunglasses. Recognizing her instantly, the guard wordlessly lifted the gate and allowed them to pass through, approaching the great and monstrous form of the airship Bannockburn. Higgs staggered out of the passenger side door, his tablet tucked inside a brown leather satchel Lottie had had custom made for him on his 18th birthday. He adjusted the tightness of the brace around his elbow, still getting used to it, and tried to ignore the lightning that permeated his bones. Lottie had already managed to charm a young sky sailor into pulling Higgs's suitcases from the trunk of the convertible. Or, no, that wasn't quite right. Higgs watched as Lottie leaned in close to the young man, brushing the dangling ends of his 2-strand twists over his shoulder and then pressing a familiar and intimate kiss to his elegant dark brown cheekbones. That explained her lack of enthusiasm regarding the mysterious Wimbledon prince. "Oh, you should meet my brother," she said, suddenly realizing she was being watched. "Horace, but we all call him Higgs. Higgs, this is Monty. He's a sailor." Monty tipped his cap. "Nice to meet you," Higgs tapped out on his tablet, and Monty waited patiently as the robotic voice relayed his message. "You too. Lottie talks about you often," Monty said, and then blanched. "Lot, you're not about to spring your dad on me too, are you?" "Oh, God, no," Lottie said. "He'll be coming to see the airship depart once we get closer to takeoff, but we have a few hours." Above them, the great balloon of the blimp creaked in the wind, the thick material shining in the sun. "Do you crew the Bannockburn?" Higgs asked Monty. "No, sir, I crew the Mistral a few bays down. We have a couple weeks landside, so I figured I'd help with loading and prepping the Bannockburn. Nice to have a little extra cash on the side. Plus, she's a beaut." "Sure is," Lottie replied, dreamy-eyed as she took in the great and storied Zeppelin. Zeppelin was not the most efficient way to travel, neither for speed nor for cost. But it had a certain magic about it, and that was thought to be quintessential if one wanted to find the lost island. So said the myths and all the accounts by those who had managed to reach the fabled land, of which very, very few had ever returned. Horace Sr., otherwise not a particularly whimsical man, had been willing to forfeit a certain practicality in order to achieve his dream of financing the mission that would, once and for all, chart a repeatable course to the mythical place. If one believed in such things anyway. Most people did not. The skeptics argued that all the accounts of mysterious disappearances could be explained by freak meteorological incidents, and those who claimed to have been to the Lost Island and returned were accused of being frauds and liars looking to get famous or make a quick buck. Did Higgs believe? You aren't sure, but you've heard his prayers in the night, and the muffled, indistinct curses under his breath. As Higgs turned to give Lottie and Monty a moment's privacy, his eyes fell on the famed silhouette of Captain Marielle de Vovk, their hair a smudge of well-established gray, face lined with wrinkles. Captain Vovk stood behind a man Higgs only recognized from what he thought had been a dream. Higgs watched the captain of the Bannockburn, one of the few who had found the Lost Island and returned unscathed and unbelieved, shake the man's hand. But then the blimp shifted, the sun shot a glaring beam just over the upper ridge, and by the time Higgs's eyes adjusted, the man had vanished. There will be no poll this week. Cycle 99 is written, created, and produced by Hannah Semmelhack. The theme song is The Boy and the Kite by Solitude. To vote on end of chapter and character creation polls for free, visit patreon.com/pitchpine productions. Higgs Worthsome was designed by you. Join the Patreon as a free member to vote on future character creation polls. Thank you to my lovely beta readers Fiona, Aaron, and Paige, and to Basil, official lore keeper. Special thanks to Mothfella, CK, and Rainstorm. And thank you for reading, listening, and voting. May fate's 4 winds carry you back to our skies again soon.